Until very recently, the dominant fear in popular culture was overpopulation. Right up through the 2000s, scientists and writers warned that humanity was getting too big for the planet to support. In Dan Brown's novel Inferno, the antagonist flatly declares that overpopulation is a disease. If we don't face it, we're just putting a bandage on a cancer. Half a century earlier, biologist Paul Ehrlich, in his book The Population Bomb, frightened the world with visions of mass famine triggered by a demographic explosion. It wasn't just a few voices, there were full-on campaigns built around the anxiety of a planet with too many people. Today, the rhetoric has flipped 180 degrees. Increasingly, experts aren't talking about overpopulation at all. They're focused on a demographic downturn, falling birth rates, and rapidly aging societies. Global population is still growing on momentum, but forecasts now show a peak and then a long decline within this century. The buzzwords have changed to demographic crisis, fertility crisis, even the fear of entire nations dying out. Billionaires like Elon Musk say collapsing fertility is a bigger threat to civilization than climate change. The conversation has shifted. Instead of managing births down, governments everywhere are asking how to persuade people to have more children. The numbers back it up. Total fertility rates are falling almost everywhere. A century ago, an average woman had between 5 and 7 children. Today, the global total fertility rate is hovering near the replacement level, roughly a bit over 2, and keeps edging down. Most developed countries have been below replacement for years, but what alarms demographers is that developing countries are joining the slide, including places that traditionally had large families. By 2100, some estimates suggest 97% of countries could be below replacement, a situation without precedent in human history. So what exactly is happening? What risks does it pose? And how might modern science and AI help? Let's dive into this artificial womb because I'm on probation for diving into the natural ones. Let's go. The fertility drop cuts across wealth, religion, and culture. Western nations in Europe and North America have settled into long-term low fertility, around 1.5 children per woman or less. East Asia is where it's most acute. South Korea's total fertility rate hit a record low of just 0.78 in 2022, with a forecast of 0.68 for 2025. Japan is in the same boat, around 1.3 and drifting down. Young Japanese and Koreans are forming families less often. Here's a striking detail. In South Korea in 2023, for the first time, stroller sales for pets surpassed stroller sales for babies. 57% went to dogs and cats, only 43% to infants. It's a symbol of how few children are being born. Similar trends show up in poorer countries. Iran and Bangladesh are already near or below 2, despite having large families just a few decades ago. Even in parts of Africa, fertility is edging down as urbanization and education spread. Many Muslim-majority countries once known for rapid growth, Indonesia, Egypt, and others, are also seeing declines. Overall, the United Nations says the world is experiencing an unprecedented global drop in fertility. And here's the paradox: people still say they want kids. A multi-country survey across 14 nations found that most respondents dream of 2 or more children, but in reality, families end up smaller than they intended. Nearly 1 in 5 people worldwide say they can't have as many children as they'd like. That gap is the real crisis. Why are people having fewer kids? The reasons are complex and social, not a sudden biological wave of infertility. First, raising children has become economically punishing. In agrarian life, big families made economic sense, kids worked the land. In modern cities, children are a luxury good that requires enormous spending. Housing, education, healthcare costs push many couples toward one child or toward delaying parenthood indefinitely. Money is the #1 reason people cite for having fewer children. 39% of respondents say finances are the main barrier, and in South Korea that figure climbs to 58%. A man in Mumbai put it this way: "It's hard enough to give one child what they need: school, activities, doctors. A second? We're scared we just can't manage it." Parents everywhere do the math and recoil at the total. Pause right now and tell me in the comments what you see as the main reason behind this problem. A second related pressure is time and energy. Career pace, long workdays, and lengthy commutes leave little left over for family life. A woman working full-time often feels she can barely give enough attention to one child, let alone 2 or 3. People are entering adult life later, extending education, building careers, marrying closer to 30 or beyond. The first child arrives later, and many simply run out of runway for a second. The fertile window shrinks. Later marriages and high divorce rates also depress birth rates. Demographer Lyman Stone notes that in the United States, surveys show a desire for 2 to 3 kids, but actually reaching that number is mainly a married couple phenomenon, and there are simply fewer marriages now than before, so there are fewer children. Values and lifestyles are shifting too. Modern society offers young people countless alternative paths to fulfillment careers: travel, hobbies, entertainment, full digital lives. Personal growth, education, and self-discovery become the priority, and having several children is sometimes seen as colliding with those plans. Freedom, hedonism, and individualism gain ground, and fewer people feel psychologically ready to commit to parenthood early. Anxiety about the future plays a role as well. Many in the West worry about ecological crisis, climate change, and general instability. In one study, about 1 in 5 young female scientists said they were deliberately refusing or delaying childbirth because of climate fears. An Australian couple told reporters they were afraid of what their child's life would look like in a world of climate disasters and collapsing species. That sentiment feeds into a broader climate strike against having kids. You also cannot ignore how women's status has changed. Everywhere women gain education and paid work, fertility falls. That is not a mystery. Educated, economically independent women tend to plan families deliberately and often choose fewer children. There is a well-known gender inequality and low fertility paradox in rich countries. Where it remains hard for women to combine career and motherhood, families stop at one child. Demographer Peter MacDonald argues that when women enter universities and the workforce, but the bulk of housework and child-rearing still falls on them, having many children becomes unrealistic. Some conservatives blame feminism, saying women simply do not want to have kids or put careers ahead of family. In reality, women say they want both children and careers, but modern systems make that combination hard. Add to this the claim of a war of the sexes, with many men avoiding marriage. Fewer marriages mean fewer births. These are complex social dynamics. The core point researchers agree on is this: today's low fertility mostly reflects conscious choices people make under current conditions, not some sudden biological collapse in human fecundity. Most people are physically capable of having more children. They choose not to, given their realities. What are countries doing to stop depopulation? Many governments are sounding the alarm and rolling out pro-natalist moves, from cash bonuses to full-blown have-a-baby ad campaigns. The standard tool is a baby bonus, a lump sum payment at birth, or monthly child allowances. Singapore has long paid parents per newborn and especially nudges second and third children. During the pandemic, it added extra baby bonuses to cushion a projected dip in births. In South Korea in 2022, a generous stipend was introduced, about $750 per month for each newborn through the first year of life. Policymakers there have even floated paying a family about $70,000 for a birth. In China, after ending the one-child policy, local authorities raced to offer incentives, cash worth several $1,000s for a second or third child, and tax breaks for young couples. European countries are also trying. Italy and France have monthly allowances and tax credits for kids, and Scandinavia is famous for long paid parental leaves and affordable daycare, so women do not feel forced to sacrifice careers to have children. Since the 2000s, Russia has paid maternity capital for second and subsequent children, and recently President Vladimir Putin restored the honorary mother heroine title with an award of roughly $17,000 for women who bear 10 children. Hungary under Viktor Orban built a whole package: lifetime income tax exemption for women with 4 or more children, minivan subsidies for families with 3, and cheap housing loans for newlyweds, anything to nudge births upward. The sobering verdict from specialists so far is that no country has managed a dramatic, lasting lift in fertility with these tools. Cash transfers often create a short-term blip birth spike right after a bonus is launched, then fall back. Couples time a baby to capture the bonus, then pause, delaying the next child. Making family life easier, daycare, parental leave undeniably helps, and France's experience shows you can stabilize at a relatively higher level, around 1.8 children per woman, among the best in Europe. Yet even France remains below replacement after decades of policy. Hungary raised its total fertility rate from about 1.2 to about 1.6 between 2010 and 22 with pro-family measures, then progress stalled. South Korea, despite spending well over $100 billion since the early 2000s on family support, keeps posting record lows. Japan, Taiwan, and Singapore tell similar stories. Even with subsidized IVF and childcare, the fertility curve slides down. Demographers conclude that financial and social supports are necessary but insufficient to bring back large families. There is no simple recipe. More generous payments may raise fertility only a little. One expert estimates that if a state covers about 5% of the cost of a child, fertility rises by roughly 5%. That is helpful, but not transformative, because the deeper social drivers are entrenched. Politicians are also wary of crossing the line where incentives become coercion. History offers dark lessons. In the mid-20th century, fear of overpopulation led to forced sterilizations and abortion bans. Today, some authoritarian leaders, invoking a demographic crisis, tighten rules on divorce, contraception, and migration. The United Nations urges governments to avoid panic and manipulation and to respect reproductive rights. Economist Nancy Folbre puts it bluntly, low fertility has economic roots, and boosting births is not the only fix. You can also reform economies instead of blaming individual families. Amid all this anxiety, people are hunting for unconventional fixes, including new technology. One of the boldest ideas is the artificial womb. The concept is simple to state and hard to build. Gestation would happen outside the body in a dedicated device. In other words, a robot or an AI-guided system could carry a pregnancy and deliver a baby for a human. It sounds like science fiction, yet the idea has a long history. In the 1920s, biologist J.B.S. Haldane coined the term exogenesis for development outside the maternal body. Fiction kept returning to the image of factory nurseries. Aldous Huxley's Brave New World imagined a future where children were grown in bottles and the very idea of a mother disappeared. Reality is far from that, but science is inching forward with very different goals. In theory, an artificial womb would replicate the inner world of the uterus. The fetus would float in a nutrient solution that plays the role of amniotic fluid. Oxygen and nourishment would reach it through lines that stand in for the placenta, and waste would be removed. Temperature, pressure, sterility, and other conditions would be tightly controlled. A web of sensors and AI would watch development and tune the mix of nutrients, oxygen delivery, and hormone levels. Think of a next-generation incubator designed not just for preemies as in modern hospitals, but for carrying a pregnancy across a long stretch of time. The ideal end state would be a full journey from a lab-created embryo to a term newborn. The machine would take over the maternal functions. That could bring clear benefits. Women would be spared the physical burden and risks of pregnancy. People who cannot carry a child because of illness or injury would have a path to parenthood without surrogacy. And in the most radical visions, governments could scale production when a nation faces demographic collapse. Silicon Valley voices have openly speculated about this reset. Vitalik Buterin and Brian Armstrong have mused that artificial wombs could remove the female body as a limiting factor and help restart fertility. Tech culture often believes a stubborn social failure can be patched with a gadget, so of course exogenesis attracted startup curiosity. What exists in practice is not a full artificial womb but working building blocks. A breakthrough arrived in 2017 at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Neonatologists there tested a device nicknamed the BioBag with extremely premature lambs. These animals matched a human fetus at roughly 23 weeks. The lambs were sealed inside a clear bag filled with a synthetic amniotic fluid and were connected by their umbilical vessels to an external oxygenator that acted like a placenta. Over 4 weeks, they developed almost as they would in utero. They grew wool, opened their eyes, and their brains and lungs kept maturing. In a standard incubator, such a fetus would not survive. Inside the BioBag, vital signs stayed stable. The key design choice was to avoid a mechanical pump. The fetal heart itself drove blood through the external gas exchange unit. Earlier attempts with pumps had damaged delicate hearts. Here, the circulation worked with the fetus's own beat, while the bag shielded the lambs from infection and held a precise temperature. After a month, the researchers humanely euthanized the animals and examined the organs. Development closely matched normal intrauterine growth. In 2021, the same group reported that in this extracorporeal setup, brain gene activity in preterm fetal sheep tracked the pattern seen in those still in the womb. In other words, the device prevented the usual brain delays common in extreme prematurity. The Philadelphia project is called Extend. Its aim is not to grow babies from scratch, but to rescue the tiniest preemies on the edge of viability. Medicine can save some of these infants today, but many survivors suffer severe complications like ventilator-induced lung injury or brain bleeds. The hope is that an artificial womb becomes a bridge. Instead of throwing a fragile newborn onto harsh intensive care hardware, Caregivers could place them into a gentler womb-like environment for several weeks until organs mature. Extend targets the window from about 23 to 28 weeks to raise survival and reduce disability for births at the start of the third trimester. In 2023, the team sought approval to begin human trials. That autumn, the United States regulator held hearings on the ethics of such studies. If all goes well, the first human infants supported by an artificial womb could appear in the near future, though only for late gestational support. The scientists stress that their technology is not meant to carry an embryo from zero to term. It does not initiate life. It picks up an extremely premature infant and gives them extra time to mature in conditions that mimic the womb. Even so, progress in neighboring fields keeps inching toward a full exogenous pregnancy. Neonatology is pressing down to the edge of viability around 22 weeks outside the maternal body, while embryology is stretching how long an embryo can be grown before implantation. In 2021, Israeli researchers sustained mouse embryos outside the womb up to day 11 of development, roughly half a mouse pregnancy, using a specialized rotating bioreactor. That set a record. With humans, there is a legal red line known as the 14-day rule, because around that point the embryo would implant and further culture is prohibited. Even so, labs have brought human embryos in vitro very close to that boundary, up to 13 days, to study early development. In theory, if science safely and ethically extended culture beyond 14 days, a laboratory embryo could be transferred directly into an artificial womb rather than a human uterus. Right now, there is a gap of roughly 18 weeks between what in vitro fertilization and early embryo culture can do and what artificial gestation can support later on. If future technology spans that middle stretch, a complete pregnancy outside the body moves from fiction to engineering. Research programs are popping up around the world. Groups in Japan, the Netherlands, Australia, Singapore, Spain, and elsewhere are building their own versions of artificial placentas and wombs. A team at the University of Michigan is pursuing a different artificial placenta approach in which the fetus is not fully immersed in fluid. Instead, a nutrient solution is delivered into the lungs through a tube and a pump drives oxygen into the bloodstream through a neck connection. Methods vary, but the shared goal is better support for extremely preterm infants. China shows vivid interest too. In Suzhou in 2022, engineers demonstrated a prototype with an AI caregiver that automatically monitored embryos developing in an artificial medium, adjusting parameters and alerting humans when something looked wrong. Those tests were in mice because law forbade the use of human embryos. Chinese media then ran a splashy story. By 2026, a humanoid robot would be able to carry a child, and a prototype allegedly existed at a cost of about $14,000. Later reporting showed the claim was at least half fake, including a fabricated institutional affiliation for the developer Zhang Qifeng. Still, the idea of a pregnant robot seized public imagination. Local outlets frankly framed it as a potential answer to a shortage of women and collapsing birth rates. Some people do not want marriage but want a child, the argument went, or do not want pregnancy but do want children. Integrate a mature artificial womb module into a robot and you could reproduce with minimal involvement from a woman. For now, that is hype. No such robot exists. The very fact it became a headline shows how seriously societies are beginning to consider gestation outside the human body. Now the hard question. Would artificial wombs actually fix demography? Suppose scientists reach the point where a healthy baby can be safely grown without a woman's pregnancy. Is that a cure for the fertility slump? Many futurists hope so, arguing that removing the 9-month biological bottleneck raises the number of people willing to have children. The heaviest burden of motherhood would shift to a machine and parents would receive a child ready for life. Pronatalist entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley openly imagine families having more kids without derailing a woman's career or health. Demographers mostly answer with skepticism. As we have seen, the main drivers of low fertility are social. People defer or avoid parenthood for reasons that go far beyond fear of pregnancy. For some women, health risks or fears about the body are indeed a barrier, and lifting gestation off their shoulders could matter. Career-focused women might choose a first child earlier or say yes to a third, knowing pregnancy will not bench them. Couples facing recurrent miscarriage or uterine factors would gain a new path that does not rely on surrogacy. In that sense, artificial gestation widens the reproductive window just as in vitro fertilization, egg donation, and surrogacy already do. It could add births that otherwise would not happen. But that is not the core of the global decline. The vast majority of adults remain fertile, and simply choose fewer children given their realities. Even in countries that subsidize in vitro fertilization and infertility care, the average number of children per woman keeps sliding. Analysts who try to quantify the upside find that even under bold assumptions, the lift is modest. A routine, socially accepted exogenesis might nudge total fertility upward by perhaps 0.3 to 0.5 children per woman. In the United States, for example, an average of about 1.6 might rise toward roughly 1.9. That matters, yet it still falls short of 2.1, the replacement level, and it does not trigger a new baby boom. Populations would keep aging and in many places shrinking, just a bit more slowly. Some experts warn of a boomerang. If people conclude they can delay even longer thanks to technology, they may push first births further back and lifetime family size could drop. Banking on machines to solve demography is a category error. In the end, this is on us, with our own hands and, yes, the relevant organs. Beyond raw numbers, there are social and ethical knots. Even if artificial wombs become safe, will people adopt them at scale? Pregnancy is not only burden, it is a profound psychological experience that shapes the bond between mother and child. Many women cherish it and will not want to skip it. What happens to attachment if a baby grows for 9 months in a capsule rather than under a mother's heart? Psychologists do not yet know. In natural gestation, the fetus hears her voice and heartbeat and swims in the hormonal chemistry of her emotions. That affects child and mother, building a mutual attachment before birth. A machine cannot truly imitate human presence. The baby develops without touch. The mother's body does not enact the day-to-day dance of carrying. Ethicists warn that embodied gestation has no mechanical substitute. Move reproduction into a sterile process and you risk treating a child as a product. Commercial surrogacy already sparks arguments about renting wombs and contracting babies. Here the woman vanishes from the pipeline altogether, and you get delivery as a service. New stigma could emerge between those born of a womb and those born of a device. However safe the tech, moral shock is inevitable because the image of a human growing in a vessel is so foreign. The debates will echo the fights over in vitro fertilization, stem cells, and cloning with an even higher temperature. Law will follow close behind. A question already floated is whether artificial gestation would change the abortion debate. Some will argue there is no need to terminate if an embryo can be transferred and grown externally. That is a separate thorny issue, but it shows how far the ripples could travel. Then there is the everyday life of these children. Biologically, a baby born from an artificial womb would be like any other newborn. Ordinary parents would raise them. A mother might not breastfeed, although lactation can sometimes be induced hormonally. Futurists paint wilder scenarios in which AI nannies and robot caregivers round out the techno-nursery. That drifts into cyberpunk. At first, children born outside a body would almost certainly be deeply wanted and loved. The unusual path would just be part of their story. Families might need to explain that story early so it carries no sting. History suggests that normalization is likely. Test tube babies once stirred panic. Now, in vitro fertilization is part of everyday medicine. Exogenous children could follow the same path toward normal. Cautionary voices should be heard, though. One Chinese physician put it starkly, if hospitals turn into factories making children, who takes responsibility for them? Birth is only half the work. Love and care are the hard part. A nation that tries to mass-produce citizens in capsules risks building a dystopia straight out of Huxley. That fear is not groundless. Which is why even champions of the technology keep saying the last word belongs to ethics and humanism. No wishful gadget will solve the fertility slump on its own. The roots are social, economic, and cultural. To make people want more children again, societies will have to change the conditions of life, not just the machinery of reproduction. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. The follow-up is already live. What designer babies are and how the tech actually works. It is a wild tour.